Staying with elections, the National Assembly now passing the Electoral Matters Amendment Bill, which changes the way in which government funds political parties. Technically, the bill had to be passed to ensure independent candidates could also receive government funding. But the bill's been criticised for giving the ANC a bigger share of government's political party funding. There's a lot more to this bill, of course, because of the introduction of independent candidates into our elections. Michael Atkins is an independent elections analyst. Michael, good afternoon to you. So, the bill still goes through the National Council of Provinces, but what does it change? What changes does it make for these elections?
Good afternoon, yes. Well, as you mentioned, some of the normal, ordinary changes relating to independent candidates, their donations reporting requirements, liaison with the IEC and their political broadcast and political advertising rights in the Electronic Communications Act. But in addition to that, as you mentioned, there is a change to the funding allocation to parties. These are the funds allocated each year to political parties and obviously independents after the election. And then also the capacity of the president to set the donations limits and the reporting thresholds for donations.
Is it fair? I mean, are all the political parties and candidates being treated fairly under this bill?
That's an open question. Before 2018, there was a certain split where 90% of the funds were allocated according to the size of parties and only 10% spread more evenly. That was changed after much discussion in 2018 and a long process of discussion between the parties, and there was unanimous agreement that it should be 2/3 according to the size of party and 1/3 spread evenly. Now, this is being changed back. The motivation seems weak because there is no real consequence flowing from the introduction of independent candidates who are simply one-member parties, if you want to put it that way. So it's not clear why the introduction of independents should necessitate this change to the funding. And this is almost going to apply retrospectively because, for example, there was an extra allocation of 200 million or so that was voted in December, and it appears that that will now be distributed to parties for this election according to the new formula and not that which was in place when the funding was allocated.
Michael, that would seem to be, to do something retrospectively, you're not supposed to do that. It would open the door, dare I say it, to a court challenge, surely.
Well, the smaller parties who all stand to lose substantial funding, the smaller parties stand to lose half of the additional funding for this election, as well as half of their funding on an ongoing basis. So they are talking about approaching the courts. Obviously, we know that urgent applications are always difficult, and we don't know how the courts would rule on the merits of the case either. But it does seem to be that this is going to impact on several of the ANC's competitor parties, how they are able to conduct this election. So perhaps the urgency question is raised by the fairness of this election.
Do you expect it to make a big difference in the election? Does it matter? And when it comes to money during elections, I suppose money does matter.
Certain parties are going to get and retain their support more or less independently of what they spend. But some of the smaller parties, for example, if they are suddenly unable to put up posters, their supporters may think that they no longer exist. So that is a question really that you should direct to the parties themselves in terms of how a potential sudden withdrawal of funding would affect their logistics and their support.
We've seen so much talk about independent candidates. So much has had to change. So many different laws have had to change. There's been so much debate around how to do it. And we're now going to have independent candidates. With everything that's going on at the moment, Michael, do you think that's actually going to lead to a significant change in the results of this election? I realize I'm asking you to predict the future.
Look, only a relatively small number of independent candidates have registered for the election. There are 16 who have put in their registrations for National Assembly elections split through the 9 regions. It will be interesting to see who those people are. But more surprisingly, there are only 11 candidates for the 9 provincial legislature elections. And due to the high vote requirement for independent candidates in the National Assembly elections, it's actually surprising that there aren't more independents vying for the provincial legislatures, where it's possible to be elected on much, much lower vote numbers.
Michael Atkins, thank you. Independent elections analyst, really appreciate that.